Hello and welcome. My goal here today is to explore what I believe to be the four main characteristics of a person's worldview. Now, of course, this is not an exhaustive list. If you think about it, you can probably make other classifications, but I do believe these four to be the four main ones. So, first place in our list, I chose to give to what I called precision. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you know what a worldview is, you know that in essence, it's the bundle of perspectives you hold with which you interpret reality. So, what that means is that by definition, our worldview is not reality itself. There is a difference or a disparity between the two, and there will always be that disparity. Which doesn't mean that all perspectives are equal and different people and everyone is as far away from reality as the others. Some people actually have more accurate assessments of reality than their peers. That's precision. Unfortunately, there isn't a objective metric to measure that, especially if we consider that different people will be more precise when it comes to certain subjects and less precise when it comes to other subjects. But what we do have, and I think that's a fair approximation of precision, is predictive power. So if two people experience an event, those two people will probably have an idea of what the consequences of that event will be. And as time passes, it may happen that the consequences one person imagined unfolded and the other person's didn't. So we can say that probably in that specific circumstance, the person who got it right had a more precise understanding of what was happening. Now, of course, one event, it's too little data to arrive at any definite conclusion of who has the most precise worldview. But if a person has the habit of constantly making wrong predictions or constantly making right predictions, that will point to how accurate their view of reality really is. So, to quickly exemplify what I mean, I think we could go back to an example I used in my first video about the comet that is passing through the sky, and you have one very religious and dogmatic person who sees the comet and think it's a sign that God is angry with him, and the other person who's a more studied and scientifically minded person who sees the comet and know that it's in the orbit and wherever. The second person will be able to make much more accurate precisions about how long will the comet stay in the sky, when, if ever, it will come again, or if they are in danger and if this comet may fall on Earth, whereas the first person who thought it was a sign from God will probably be able to make no predictions, and if they try, they will probably be wrong predictions. Second place on our list, we have cohesion. Now, what does that mean? Cohesion, at least when it comes to a worldview, means how well do the different beliefs you hold aligned with each other. So let's say you believe forests are important and we have a duty to protect the environment, we as humans. But at the same time, you believe that you have a right to have new clothes each season and a right to travel by plane each holiday and a right to this and that. It may come to be the point that eventually your perceived rights will clash with what you believe to be your duties. And that's just one example. But what will happen then is that if you become aware of that conflict, you'll feel anxiety. That's cognitive dissonance. You are holding incompatible beliefs within yourself, and that will make you feel weird. What tends to happen then is that either you are forced to adapt and change your perspective, or you just become unaware of the conflict. So you will forget that you had a discussion with your friend who pointed it out to you, and you become blissfully unaware that there is any lack of cohesion within you. Now, it doesn't have to be a clash between duties and responsibilities. I think another interesting example is that you might hold the belief that every human being is worthy of love and acceptance and whatnot. But maybe deep down within yourself, you have some core belief that you're not worthy of this and that. In this second situation, it's a clear case where one of the beliefs is something you are aware of, and the other one is something you are unaware. There is a lack of cohesion, and every lack of cohesion will manifest in some way, but you will not feel the cognitive dissonance because you are not aware of the problem. And this brings us to the third place on our list, which is awareness. Now, awareness is very important because, as people often say, the first step to solving a problem is diagnosing it. And the first step to diagnosing it is knowing that there is a problem. You can't fix what you don't know. So let's use the example of a person who believes that everyone is worthy of love, acceptance, and respect, but who has deep down a belief that they, for some reason, aren't. If they are unaware of this belief, they will probably go through their whole life self-sabotaging and having that specific belief influence the way they act, because every belief influences the way we act, and they won't be able to do anything about it. If they know that the problem is there, sure, they might face some cognitive dissonance and anxiety and discomfort and some weird emotions that come with having to deal with things that are important to us, but this person will at least have a chance of solving the problem. I personally think it can't be overstated how important it is to be aware of how you see reality. Like in the example before this one, where you had an argument with a friend and he called out how incoherent you are in the way you view your place in the world. If you don't try and become as aware as possible of who you are on your own terms, life may force you to do so on its own terms, and that might not be to your benefit. If you have conflicting beliefs that you're not aware of, and at some point that gets called out, you will feel anger, you feel lots of very strong emotions that might be hard to deal with, and it might be the case that that will happen in a very important moment at some point where you need to make a very important decision or something like that, where it's definitely not the ideal scenario to have an internal crisis. And the best way to avoid that is try to dig within yourself and find those points of conflict before you are forced to do so. Last place on our list, though not due to lesser importance and more due to happenstance, we have flexibility, or maybe you could call it adaptability, which is to say how well your worldview can adapt to new information, maybe even information that contradicts your previously held beliefs. That's a very important characteristic for obvious reasons, but I think that one of the main drives of how adaptable your perspective on reality is how each of your beliefs can stand on its own. And I believe the main drive for that is whether a belief is held because evidence and your experience supports that, or because you need that to be true. So let's say you have this person who's very much against abortion. Maybe they even go to rallies in front of abortion clinics and whatnot because they are very passionate about this. You may find, if you're able to have a deeper conversation with that person, that they are so adamant about abortion because if they can't trust that abortion is wrong, then they can't trust that the church is always right. And if they can't trust that the church is always right, then maybe that means they also can trust that there is a heaven. And if they can trust that there is a heaven, maybe that means that a loved one that they lost or something will never be seen again. And maybe they aren't ready for that. Maybe they didn't manage to grieve that loss properly or something like that. And so instead of processing those emotions, they built a network of beliefs that sustains their hope of seeing that person again or something like that. That's an example. So when you hold beliefs for emotional reasons and not because they seem reasonable and because they stand on its own, you will tend to have a very hard time adapting to new realities. So as you can see by the examples given, there is a lot of interplay between each of these characteristics. Like awareness is essential for you to develop a cohesive and flexible worldview. Precision and flexibility also walk hand in hand, as a more adaptable and therefore more down to earth perspective on reality will probably also be a more precise one. That's because they are all different facets of the same thing, which is your worldview. And so none of them can be taken apart, and you never truly get a grasp of how well your perspective is built or how well someone else sees reality unless you take all four into account. And to relate this a little bit with the content of my previous video about the pillars of a person's worldview, if you think about it, precision applies mostly to a person's beliefs and their tools. Cohesion usually happens inside each pillar. So are your values cohesive? Are your beliefs cohesive? Flexibility applies mostly to beliefs, and awareness applies to the whole thing. Now, as a bonus point, something that I almost listed as a characteristic here, but I chose not to, is meaningfulness. I think meaningfulness also arises in a way due to a relationship between all those three pillars, but I also think it's more than that. Here, when speaking of worldview, I think mostly of mental constructs, ideas. And when speaking of meaningfulness, of course your ideas and beliefs are important, but I think there is also something of a feeling. You feel your life is meaningful, and I think that goes beyond, and I'll probably eventually make a video on that, but I wouldn't say meaningfulness is just a characteristic of your worldview specifically. I think it's much more than that. But yeah, if you watched thus far, thank you very much, and I will see you on the next one.